So here we are backstage. Thank you all for getting us started on this conversation. I'm wondering about picking up the concepts of empowerment and agency. One of the questions
that was a good one
that Cynthia asked to ask right at the end of the broadcast was, what about waiting to be asked to help? I'm interested in thought on that.
That is a very good question. When we reach out, myself included, I'm a teacher, teach little kids. And when we reach out to offer someone help without them asking, we're making a huge assumption and presumption on our part. We assume that they can't figure it out on their own. And we presume that we have all the answers. That's the way I see it. And I think I say stuff to help people out of the assumption always, because I'm Darnell, that they don't know anything every single time. And so that's a problem I have, right? That's a huge problem. In the end, they're going to say, oh, thank you so much for your help. I mean, you didn't have to insult me along the way, but I really appreciate your help. So I think it's the same kind of mindset. I just offered my help. I saw they were struggling with something. They're trying to figure it out, couldn't figure it out. And I just said, hey, why don't you try it like this? Or didn't you know you could do this? And even the way you say questions or form questions, it comes off as demeaning and insulting. It's a very fine line that I'm still trying to learn and work my way through.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about the parable of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritan comes along and sees the man on the side of the road and doesn't ask, right? Or doesn't wait to be asked by the man, right? He just steps in and does. Maybe that's part of the narrative we need to unpack. Maybe it would be better if the Samaritan did ask, is there something I can do? Would you like my help? I don't know.
I think yes, I think it's always good to ask. But I think that there are times where it's very obvious that someone needs help, right? So I think the reality is when we see somebody that is in an emergency situation that needs help, I don't know that it's necessarily white savior complex if you are reacting in a moment's notice. But if it's a matter of, like you were saying, Darnell, about, well, I know how to do this. I know a lot of things, and I'm, so good at this. So I'm going to insert myself into a situation. Right. Then, that's something we see. Like, I've seen people who interject with parenting in grocery stores, and, it's like that sort of stuff. Then I think it's not so much a good thing.
One thing that I've really appreciated in this current time period is listening to some of the guidance from Black Lives Matter, and that is very explicit on this is how you can help. When you show up, but you're not in charge. You're there to support. This is, you shouldn't be leading these hands, but we want your support. And I think that's been helpful for me to figure out how, and one of the important parts within that is there's a lot going on in the world. There are so many strong communities and churches and organizations that are led by Black sisters and brothers that that we can enter into relationship and ask that initial question: can I participate? Can I ask a question? Can I listen for a bit? And if that's an honest question, I think it's an introduction to a relationship where maybe I don't need to be in charge. Maybe I don't need to be the one leading the chant, but it opens my eyes to the work that is already going on in this field, whether as a church or as a movement.
Was there a moment in your work in Uganda, you talked a little bit about that in the beginning,
mm-hmm.
where you reached a new level of wokeness, or where you where some of those scales fell from the eyes, to use Paul's metaphor, Paul's conversion?
Yeah, I mean, I can give a very specific example in my work with water development. My introduction to this work was I stayed for a week with a family in a village, and they were waking up at 5 a.m. to walk for an hour to gather water and then come back, and I saw a problem. And so I thought, I'm going to help out with this problem. And we were able to raise some funds, and we raised funds for a water well, and we did it textbook wrong. I mean, they could not have done it more wrong, because we saw the problem, we got the contractor, we said, okay, this is where it's going to go. And what we didn't do was work through the local structures, the local politics, the local community discernment process. And within months, the well was broken because a $10 part was in replacement. But who was going to fix it? There were no clear lines of responsibility or ownership. That was the missionaries' well, and we spotted the issues very quickly, and because of the degree of the mistake, and there was an organization there in Jinja, Uganda, that took us by the hand and walked us through the process of communication with the local governance within the community, communication to set up a board of who was really going to own this, who was going to repair it. All these structures were in place. We weren't establishing something new. It was just a matter of learning, how do you work within a system where the local community already has control. They've already got the tools to manage this, unless somebody comes in with a savior complex and just says, here you go, it's right here. It blows up all of the local power structures that are set up to maintain a resource like that.
Jeff, one of the questions that came in at the end from Teddy was about teaching, and how do we get white teachers to see their students of color as deserving of an equal education and opportunity. And I hesitate to use the word opportunity, that may have not been her word, but of an equal education, and not as their mission field.
Man, that's convicting, right? So let me just lay a couple of my personal truths out there. I have a lot of friends who I know are called to teaching. I firmly believe that. However, are you teaching in a community that you are not comfortable being a part of? And I'll just put it out there like that, right? So many of world-class educators that I know and love would rather raise their family in a different community. And I'm just going to kind of let that sit there, right? And so I think that's pretty real. This is the white savior complex in a lot of ways. If I am willing to come into a classroom and to provide my authority and my order and my structure for a lesson, but I also know that I'm coming to these kids with a lot of love, but then at 4 o'clock when that bell rings, I'm going to go to my white flight community. And that's who my network is. And maybe even my church is out there. And yeah, maybe I'll bring some food and clothes to the school that's in need, but I'm not willing to live in the community. I think that's kind of the essence of this question. And so I think we have to see ourselves in the students, and we have to be among these families and in the community. And again, it's about that relationship. It's not just the power dynamics of, well, I'm here, I work here, and so obviously I love these kids. You can love those 30 students. But I will say white flight is a huge part of what's breaking this state's public education system. The fact that our schools are funded by local property taxes and communities are underinvested in because of systemic racism and governmental policies, that zip code determines the amount of funding that kid gets. And it's just a matter of fact that brown and black kids do not get the amount of investment by our state that white kids get. And we could fix it. We could vote for politicians to create policies that would take up all the funds and give it out with equity, but we don't want to do that because we live in that white flight community. And so that's a big part of it. But I'll also say in the micro level, when you are given a lesson, you can have students that are phenomenal and they can answer every single question right, but are you building in wait time so that every student feels empowered enough to speak up? And what I mean by that is, are you letting the Hermione Granger just raise their hand and dominate the conversation? Or are you telling those kids to step back and create that seat at a table that we were talking about in the other video? Allow other students to start to see themselves as filling that seat and rising to the occasion. They can't do it if that one student is just quick to the trigger every single time, right? And so at the micro and the macro level, there's work to do.
Can I say something to Jeff's comment? Jeff, we're from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and you might have seen 2 weeks ago Gary Chambers with his clip of calling out the white school board member who was on her phone shopping, and they determined on her computer she was shopping for over an hour during the meeting where they were going to determine if they were going to change the name of the school from Lee High School to another name, because Lee was named after Robert E. Lee. And this is a school system we grew up in. And when we were going to elementary school, let me back up. Baton Rouge was under a desegregation court order for over 45 years, the longest in the country after Brown versus the Board of Education. So when we were growing up, we had to do a count for 10 days at the beginning of every school year. When we were growing up, it was white, non-white. Okay. In about 1995, 1996, the count shifted all of a sudden to black, non-black. And so we saw things like busing going on. We saw things like, there's no way to really desegregate this school, so because it's a mostly white community, so we're just going to pack it with black teachers. We're going to do it like that. Those were and that was the elementary school we kind of grew up in. And then it was just interesting to see how things shifted over time. But Baton Rouge is one of the most segregated places I grew up in and ever lived. I love it with all my heart, but it got some issues. And part of the issues is that we're going to stay in our community. Now, my community got their potholes fixed. My community got their roads resurfaced every 4 or 5 years. My community saw a lot of things happen because my parents made a conscious decision to move to this community to raise their children. Okay. Everybody can't do that. Everybody don't have the resources. Everybody don't have 2 working parents with college degrees, right? And grandparents who are teachers in the system their child going to, so we can make sure our kids get put in the right school in the system. You know, that's what we had. Everybody doesn't have that. And so we didn't have a white savior complex. We just had a whole community complex. We're going to fix these boys right here. So that's what we had. And I love it. I mean, I loved it. But Jeff brings up very good points. I was listening to Don Lemon's podcast, and they had a superintendent from, I can't remember what school district, talking about preparing for Corona. And then she was talking about the exact same case. Now, in Louisiana, they have a meal system, a property meal system. So the money is divvied up differently than it is in Texas. Because in Texas, your tax dollars stay right in your community. Whereas in Louisiana, your tax dollars are going to be spread all throughout the parish or the county in that sense. But it's still not spread equitably because deals are always made under the table of where this money going to go and who's going to get the contract and how would this benefit this community while all our tax dollars never get spent in this community and all those type of things. And it's a real complex issue. But you start to see these things develop over time. It's one little small step. We're gonna put this policy in place, and nobody's gonna really check the language of this bill because we're gonna slip it in at the last minute, and we're gonna get the votes we need, and it's gonna be done. And then, bam! 10 years later, you're like, "Where'd this come from?" Oh, you remember when you voted for that 10 years ago? This is Jeff. Am I wrong? Am I wrong, Jeff? This is what we see. This is what we see. You know. So because I had a conversation, Jeff, when my grandma was in the hospital in January 2016 about to receive back surgery, one of her good friends, he recently died earlier this year, not from COVID. We were talking and he said, Darnell, you ought to really run for office. And I said, man, well, I don't own property in Louisiana. You got to own property, not live in an apartment. Can't live in an apartment. No. You have to own property to be able to put yourself on ballot.
Don't say that too loud because Texas will pick that up.
And I said, man, I don't own a house. And this is what he said. He said, well, we can buy you a house. And I said, man, this conversation is over. Okay. That was 2 months. I was like, I was bought and paid for right then. So, yeah. But Jeff, I really do appreciate your comments. Yeah. Education is near and dear to my heart. I'm not a teacher. My parents were teachers. My grandparents, her, generation in our family were teachers. So we care a lot about education. Yeah.
Two of the things I hear coming up consistently in the conversation are listen and relationship. And it strikes me these are 2 things culturally that we are perhaps the worst at right now. Listening and relationship. Heather likes to call me out on listening to respond or listening to understand. And maybe that's part of what we were talking about earlier. In terms of the white savior complex. If we only listen long enough to say, okay, here's what you need to do, rather than listening to understand, then we haven't taken the time to enter into even the most basic of relationship with folks.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, all of this is important, but one of the things I think, especially as we started talking about what white savior complex is and how we understand it most plainly, the mission field is the most obvious, and I think that it's the one that probably hits home for people the most. Because even I immediately was like, okay, is that what we do? Like, I thought, okay, wait, when we go and do, our yearly trip to SSP, like, is that what we're doing? And I had to, peel back the layers and understand, SSP was one of the first organizations to really understand the difference between ministry to and ministry with. And
SSP is the
Sierra Service Project. And so they are a sister organization of Appalachian Service Project. And they're based out of California. I grew up going, and it's a cultural immersion type of situation. But I really had to peel back and say, okay, are we going in and learning as much as we are helping? And are we helping in ways that they've asked the organization to help, and not in ways that we think they need help? And are we, and kind of going through all this stuff. And so I think what's really important, especially as we're kind of wrapping this up, is in saying, missions is not bad. Like, it's not inherently bad. It's really making sure that that you're doing, again, the listening to understand and learn, and not listening to respond, and that you're doing the work that you've been asked to do, to help empower the people that you're with, more so than because you get to take a cool picture at the end of the week. I freak out about now. I'm like, I don't want to take any pictures. Don't take pictures. Because then you're just showing off. I mean, it's really hard. I mean, I get it. It does, because it makes you double second guess every single thing that you choose to do. Like, am I doing this because I just want to glorify myself and all the cool things I do?
Yeah, this is
hard.
This is a problem, has been a problem for us at St. Stephen, and St. Stephen is not unique in this. So we have a food ministry program where we provide food distribution through the North Texas Food Bank. We've taken brochures to the schools saying, hey, we've got free food for you. And, then we ask ourselves, why didn't anybody show up? Why didn't, no one took us up on our offer? Well, we just, when we're parachuting in, not asking, not listening, not in relationship, then are we, what kind of posture are we holding?
Yeah, I think food ministry is a really good example, because I can't tell you how many times I'm packing that stuff and I'm thinking, who eats this?
Right. It's hard. So we've talked a lot in the last year, started talking about how do we approach our mission and outreach programs relationally rather than transactionally. I think it's that transactional side that is that savior, right?
Yeah.
Which creates a very interesting theological circle back to the way we understand salvation as a transaction. But that's another time.
Totally. We've got like 6.5 minutes left. That's not going to work.
6.5. Well, Jeffrey, I think a lot of people work out their salvation with transactions. And I used to be one, right? Like, Robin Williams and Mrs. Doubtfire. I used to be one. Yes. Until I went to confession every week for a year, then I realized I ain't never gonna be good enough to do this, right? And but we still think somehow. I think it's because of capitalism. We have this idea in our head, and I could be totally wrong. It could be not capitalism. I don't know, but everything is just
I think there's a lot of intersectionality. I think, and a lot of this goes back to us trying to untie the knots of the Protestant Reformation. Now, there was a lot of transactionalism in the Catholic Church.
That's right.
But in a sense, we overcorrected with another kind of transactionalism that just said, okay, I have the faith, Jesus has the grace, and now we're done. Right? Sola fide. all I need is faith, and I'm saved.
Mhm.
That's a transaction. That's not a transformation, and it's certainly not a long-term relationship. And so, these ideas certainly intersect with capitalism and commerce, but they become embedded in the way that we understand what it means to save. And then if we're going to go out and save the black people or save the Africans or save the thus and thus, right? Save the poor people, then that's what we need to do. They need to have faith in us, and we bring the goods.
Right.
And we're done. You don't have to raise your hand.
Darrell.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm sitting next to Darnell. Yes, I do.
Oh,
I have a question for Spencer.
that's between the two of you.
Yeah. In the 6 years you were in Uganda, how long do you think it took you to gain the trust of the people you were working with?
Yeah, it really depends on the people and the communities. I will say that while we were there, we ended up we had a connection and ended up fostering a baby girl. The mother had died during childbirth, and her twin had died, and that lasted for about 3 months. And during those 3 months, I thought, well, I'll reduce some of my work and help my wife care for Rebecca, and they, in that time, I thought, wow, I'm really not accomplishing the work that I had set out to do. But news got around, and what I was surprised to hear is that in that action, we became one of the community. All of a sudden, we understood things that the community was going through because we participated in that event. And so where I was thinking, I've got to get back to work to earn the trust, to do the good work. We got on the other side of that and realized that was the work. It was it was participation, and I think specifically, and again, this is a larger conversation, but at the point of suffering, and identifying the pressure points and allowing yourself to participate at those points of suffering. And I think this gets to the earlier conversations about white flight, or how do you participate in a school system? How do you participate in a food bank system? Is it at a point of suffering? And I think that earned our trust more than anything else that we did there.
And it had nothing to do with what you went there to do.
And it had nothing to do, but it emerged because of relationships, and it happened within a community. So yeah.
I just got a text from Darnell saying their power went out.
Oh no!
I just thought maybe he was praying.
Yes, they looked very pious there for a minute. So this is perhaps a good place to bring our conversation to an end. It seems that nature is conspiring against us. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate the insight and vulnerability that each of you were willing to bring to the table and to the broadcast this afternoon, to the topic. And I'm grateful to be in relationship with you and to listen to what you have to offer. So
Until next time.
Until next time. Wish you well.
Thanks, all.